We are being told to choose between the left and right brain, between studying art and engineering, between creative and analytical thinking. Our society tells us that art and business are not connected. But what if society is wrong? What if it's misleading us? The good news is that understanding what art is can bring us to a new revelation. Art does matter in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship. And with the help of this podcast and its guests, you as well will learn that art is not an object. Art is a mindset. You are listening to the Artian Podcast with me, Nir Hindi. Hey podcast listeners, and thank you and welcome back to the Artian Podcast. And today we're saying hello, maybe shalom, from Tel Aviv here at the Google for Startups campus. And today we have with us Liat Segal. So Liat, first of all, thank you for coming and joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
Maybe you can start by actually introducing yourself to our listeners.
My pleasure. So I'm an artist, but I come from a very untraditional background for art. I actually studied computer science and biology. I have 2 master's degrees, one from Tel Aviv University in bioinformatics and the other in decision analysis from Minerva University in San Francisco. Actually, I started doing art professionally about 9 years ago, and I quit my day job at the time at Microsoft, where I was working as a researcher, and took a studio, and that's what I do full-time since.
Okay, so you actually started in engineering. You worked at Microsoft Lab in Israel for 3 years, and if I include also the startup that you worked, and then you started to create art. And I'm wondering, what brought you to start to create art, and why not choosing staying in Microsoft Lab, which is obviously, I would assume many people kind of desire to work in a place like that?
So I don't think it's one against the other. So I always created. I just didn't create what we call art, let's say. I think that art is about the story more than about the materiality, and you need a story to tell. I was creating things. They were just not defined as art, let's say.
Like what?
I built furnitures, I built little crazy stupid machines, mechanical machines. I think the first thing I remember building was at about the age of 5 or 6, and it was a Rube Goldberg machine that did nothing, but I really remember it as a very young kid. But I was also, as a teenager, I studied photography, but it was always a hobby, and it was something that was on the second place. In the first place took science and technology.
So what makes you kind of, I don't want to call it a changing place, but actually elevate art to the same level as science? And in a second, we speak about what the type of art that you are doing.
Yeah, so I think it's funny, but the thing that actually made me quit high-tech was that I started playing with electronics, and it started with little stupid projects that got bigger and bigger. And when I did that, they weren't art as well. They were geeky projects. But when I did that, I realized that I found my material in art. And I found stories that I could tell with technology and with this material that I started using. And just like I didn't officially studied art, I also never officially studied electronics and mechanics, but that's what I do. So with every project, they get bigger and bigger in terms of stories, but also in terms of the technology that I use. But I also keep using information and machine learning and, of course, software, which is my bread and butter.
It's kind of, now that we are speaking, it's kind of funny, because one of the things that I discovered while running the Artian is that often people think about art or artist as kind of the classical stereotype. It's a paint, white canvas, and it's often even painting. And you actually speak about technology as material and software as a material and not necessarily a paint or maybe marble for sculpture, etc. And today, I kind of want to speak about your art, because today your art actually, as you just started to mention, mix those disciplines or knowledge as an engineer or software developer and someone that build things with robotics or machines to actually influence and create your own art. But what you do is that you connect technology with humanity. And I'm interested to know what motivates you at your work. Why you actually chose technology beside the fact that you actually enjoy it or knows it.
So what motivates me is both the material and the technology, but also the story. And sometimes when I start creating, it comes from the story, or it comes from a setting or a place where I want to create and create a location-based work, for example. And then I start thinking of what is the story that I want to tell with this specific place. And sometimes it comes from the material. For example, in my work, the attending machine, it has a pigment that is sensitive to UV light, that when it is exposed to UV, it changes the color to a dark blue for a few seconds, and then it fades back to its original color. And when I got to know this material, I knew that I wanted to do something with it. And it took a while until I found the right story to tell with this material. But many times it's from the other direction. I have something that bothers me or that keeps me thinking about, that I want to tell, that I want to ask questions mostly. And then I find the visual or the material concept that joins the story. So
you work both directions,
exactly.
From the story to the material, from the material to the story.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you also refer to technology a bit different because that's honestly what I like about you and your art when it comes to technology, because you refer to technology like a human in a way, or more accurately, if I would say, you assign human characteristics to technology. We often tend to think about technology as something cold, non-humanistic, but for you, it is the opposite case. Can you elaborate on that?
I don't think it's the opposite, because I don't feel that I attach humanity exactly to technology, but I think that technology, it's just an extension of us. So if we see technology as something cold, it means that we are cold as well. And if we see technology as something that is inhuman, then it means that somebody designed it as an inhuman object. I eventually, because what I'm interested about is not the technology per se, but the humanity. So when you see a work that I created with technology, because it's not about the technology, but using technology, so you don't get this feeling of a distance or indifference.
It feels more natural to be next to.
That's what I am for, at least, yeah.
You know, you are talking and I'm getting excited because I'm surrounded and I'm operating and I work at the world of startups and technology. And it strikes me all the time how people skip the ability to get connected to artists to understand this way of thinking. And just to kind of a story that I heard is that there are some writers that developing kind of I wouldn't say algorithm, but kind of a speech stories for Alexa, how you can make Alexa more human to that. And I don't think in a way that engineers can do it, but rather maybe storyteller like writers and poets. But I want to go back to your work because you use technology to show empathy, longings, and also social phenomena like FOMO, the fear of missing out. Which actually is the theme of your latest work that presented in Petah Tikva Museum of Art. Can you give us more examples or elaborate about this work, maybe starting with FOMO?
So FOMO, fear of missing out, is something that we all experience, and I think we experienced it, or our great-grandparents also experienced. But today, with all the exposure we have to what everybody else is currently doing, we multiply this experience so much because we don't see whatever they're doing all the time. We see what they're doing at their best moments. We see their best dinners, their best days at their job, their best family moments, not when their kids are crying in a tantrum on the store floor.
Everyone
We usually don't see
life.
that. Yeah, everybody is perfect. Everybody is looking great. And, we have a complicated life. We have dull moments. We have moments when we're sad, we're crazy, we're like, they don't photo that well, these moments. And we don't upload them usually unless we have a story to tell about them. So when we are constantly exposed, it also changes our attention span as well to what we're exposed to. We keep seeing all these perfect moments, and sometimes we also upload our perfect moments. But when we upload our moments, we keep tracking how many people liked our upload, and we pay a lot of attention to it. But the amount of time we put to a photo that somebody else uploaded is minimal. It's like a split of a second. And then again, we lose the attention like really quickly. So the work that I created is a physical simulation of this experience, of this social anxiety. And it's built just like Humpty Dumpty's. The objects are about a child size, and they move with instability from side to side. They look like eggs. Their color is black with gold leaves that are spread randomly on them. And they're literally casted by the same mold. They're identical on one hand, but the gold leaves give them this random and special identity. So each one in its own eyes is a special snowflake in the world that will never repeat itself, So what they do is when they're moving as a Humpty Dumpty, they're actually simulating the fact that they're now in action, they're now in the best party ever, and they're uploading it. And when they move, they also transmit to their friends in this little social network that they're doing something special. When the other notice that somebody else is doing something, it is very likely that they'll join the movement as well. But very quickly, they'll get tired of what they're doing and they'll stop as well. So you see waves of motion in the space with these 12 egg-like, unstable little creatures.
Which, by the way, you will be able to see on our website later on. And if we have even a video, we can later upload the video if there is one for the work. So, you mentioned the work of FOMO, but personally, one of the work that I liked is the one in which you have worked with a ceramic artist. And what happened in this work is that people sang to a microphone. Their voices were transmitted to an algorithm you built that simultaneously wrote their voice on the plate. Now, I thought to myself how beautiful it can be as a present, as a memory, to hang on a wall a plate with the voice of our beloved ones. And I think this is how I see your humanistic approach to technology. Tell us more about this project.
So, Plate Recorder is a collaboration I did with the ceramic artist Roy Maayan, and together we wanted to create an archive of sounds, of human sounds, and we asked people to send us recordings they had from specific moments that were meaningful to them in some way, and to write us a few words, few sentences about these moments. Also send us the times and place of the recordings so that we create a wall full of these plates that are covered in black overglaze that is scratched with the sound waves. And the machine that does it is something that is between a plate, a record player, and the throwing wheel where you create ceramic plates. And it has the language of both. And I think it's not a coincidence that these two materials have this round motion, and it has. I think that the original records were actually done in a very similar way. They were really physically recorded in a very similar way to what we actually did. And we had many people sending us sounds, and some were beautiful stories that actually really touched me. And one of them is actually a recording that was done by an Iranian musician from Tehran. He lives today still in Tehran. And we follow each other on Instagram. And this guy, I really adore what he's doing. Like, he's using tons of traditional instruments. He's super talented. And when I was working on this project, I sent him a message and wanted to see maybe he can send me some of his works that I record them. And it actually created a really interesting conversation between the two of us. And at some point we had a video call. I don't know if it's okay to say it, but I will anyway. A video call between Tehran and Tel Aviv. We were talking for about an hour about, life. I showed him my house. He showed me his house. He played music for me. And we had like a beautiful, normal conversation between two artists, two people, regardless of where we are and the conflicts between the politicians in our countries. And the interesting thing was that when I created this plate, and eventually when we displayed the plate, it was displayed just next to a plate that we did with a recording of Benjamin Netanyahu in his talk at the UN when he was describing the great danger that we expect from Iranian nuclear. And for me, it was really interesting to see this contrast between the two. And it was a very precise moment of storytelling.
Do you have photos of those two plates?
Yes, I do. I can send you them.
Later upload them as well?
Sure.
Great. This kind of project, for me, I think resemble a lot of what you do. And I think you are an example technology companies can look up to when they want to learn how to humanize their product and services. Because everyone's speaking about human-centric design, and it's always struck me how they skip the most, at least in my opinion, the most important aspect of it, which is art and the way artists think, because artists are always kind of, I would say, experience-oriented, just then product-oriented, and they think about maybe the viewer or the person that will experience the work at the end. And you started to speak about it because you mentioned this, I would say, common, if I will call it, nourish each other, no? What are your thoughts about that?
So first of all, before I get to the art part, I think that when you say that companies want to humanize their product, I disagree with that in a way, because I think that eventually what companies want to do is to monetize their product, to make more money. And in order to do that, they want to create a more approachable products, maybe. So I don't think it's the same thing. And eventually, when we see companies that we call evil, or what they do is evil, I think that most of them are done, like the technology is developed by people that are really great people. And they're very far from being evil. And what eventually happens is something that we see from afar that is maybe evil. And there maybe is something that can be changed a bit by artists and art, because eventually what art does, in my opinion, is to raise questions and to raise awareness of human aspects of what we do. And to raise these flags of, even not as a direct criticism, because I think that's something that's very hard to do when you invite artists for example, for a residency in a technological company. It's not very likely that they'll have like a criticism in their face of a specific product, but even by just raising question and creating conversation, I think that the total summed effect is meaningful.
So you actually had this kind of certain experience because you participated in a startup accelerator program as an artist in residence, okay? And for the one that doesn't know, startup accelerators often is kind of programs between 3 to 6 months in which companies with ideas actually scale up some of their ideas for the market. And the person that actually recommended me to speak with you was Dr. Ulrich Schmitz, Managing Director at Axel Springer Digital Ventures and the co-founder of this startup accelerator. Now, Uli, as a scientist who has a passion for art, saw the need to have artists in this accelerator, and you were one of those artists that actually participated. How was this experience? I mean, what's going on over there when an artist joined 10 startups in a technology environment?
So for me, it was first an incredible experience with from two directions. I said that the first one is just as an artist. I think that most artists that do this project don't come from a technological background and still have this beautiful conversation with people that come from places that are different from them. But for me personally, it was also really fun because I missed this world in a way, and I realized it only when I was there.
What did you miss?
This startup environment, you know? Yeah, this energy. And I find it in my work, I have times that are very hectic, very busy, and I work, I think, definitely much more than I did when I was working as a developer today. But still, it's a very self-inwards work. Eventually, it's about me in many, many ways. It's about, like, we're creating, when I have a team, like now, we're creating a project that it has my title on it. It's not the product, it's not a team of effort in its conventional way or in its startup way. And to have this is something that I do miss. Like, I really loved the people that I worked with. It was a really beautiful mutual war to fight, you know? So that was one thing. But generally speaking, I can say that this environment that makes people from different disciplines with different motivation work together at, most of the time you don't have a lot of conversation about the art or about the startups, you know, like people do what they do. But just being there and speaking about life and getting to know each other makes some difference, because you actually, when startup people talk to startup people, they will speak mostly about tech. And when it's an artist that suddenly is a bit an outsider to this, suddenly the environment changes. Yeah, it shifts, exactly. And it creates something else. And I think that that's one of the greatest powers of having an artist in residence in a very technological environment.
So how long you were there?
For 3 months. The program, both for the startups and for the artists, it's the same cycle. It's a cycle of 3 months. At the same time I was working also on a solo exhibition that I had in Berlin and 2 major group shows I had also in Germany. So it was a very, very busy time for me. And I build machines, so I create a mess and noise, and I had to shift my work as well. It's to stay in harmony with all the other people that didn't like that loud sound so much. And I could relate to that very much. So it was a really interesting time for me.
What did you learn from this period working in a startup accelerator? Because you share the same space. If I recall, you even mentioned that in the demo day, on the final day of the startups, you also presented your project and you participated in the workshops, etc. So
first of all, as an artist, I was invited to use all the tools that the startups got. So we had tons of workshops and mentorships. For example, one of the workshops that we had every week was a pitch session. So we had this guy that is training people to give TED Talks.
Pitch,
and so I joined every week this pitch session. And I was very much surprised that most of the things we were doing was not actually pitching, but creating our stories, which is something that is very general and it fits me just as much as it fits any startup and any other person or business.
Totally.
Yeah. It was really beautiful to see, I saw it on the other people, how much people improved their stories and the way they were telling their stories. So it was a really nice progress.
So at least one thing that you learned from them is that how to pitch, or at least from the program.
The other thing was this program is aimed also to create connections between people outside the program. And that was something that was done beautifully, both for the startups and for me. So they created the connections for me with the galleries. And whenever I wanted some specific connection, they did everything to create this connection. And I think that's the most important thing eventually.
What do you think the entrepreneurs learned from you?
So I think it's not a direct learning, it's not like there is something very specific, like I gave a workshop, but there were things like that. But I think that what fertilizes people is the indirect conversations. And that's something that I can say about my work, for example, that I was talking to this guy who was a developer at a startup and told him what I was working on. And he actually gave me a really great idea that I later implemented in my project. And that's part of my project as well. And I think that was also this kind of mutual connection was also reciprocal, like ideas that I had maybe influenced other people, but it's just, it's just by speaking to people that are not, that see things from the outside is when you get these moments of sparks,
It's not like action reaction. It's more like,
and that's why
it's creating the environment.
Exactly, and it's important to have a long process. It's not like if you create a one-day thing, you'll have the same encounters. It's the 3 months program that creates intimacy as well, and conversations that you get to later go on and think about, and you have a night's sleep over, and then you wake up with some ideas, and you have the opportunity to go the next morning and tell this guy what you had in mind,
Yeah. So, it's kind of, you're talking and I'm thinking, if I were a program manager in a startup accelerator and I want to create my own artist in residence because I want to influence my entrepreneurs, what would be your recommendation? What can actually create a better environment?
So first of all is to physically have people of different disciplines. That's the main thing. But also to create an environment that makes people for a few hours every week quit what they're doing with all the pressure that they do have, and they have tons of pressure, as an accelerated startup. But as they have their time put on the more practical sessions, they should also spend a few hours a week on things that are completely not connected to what they do. And it can be about art, it can be about culture and social questions, and everything that is different and inspiring from what they're doing. And these things give ideas eventually that, again, they're not necessarily direct
related,
to what they're doing, but as people, they will be better people. And that's like going back to what makes technology more human, it's that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of remind me of an incubator that I heard of, and they have their business training for their startups, but what they realize is that entrepreneurship alone is not enough, and it must be connected to creativity. So they created the cultural program, and every 2-3 weeks, they will invite a scientist, a painter, a poet to speak to their entrepreneurs. You started to speak about the first thing you said is actually that they need to make sure that they have people from different disciplines. And you studied in a special kind of, I would say, or unique program in Tel Aviv University that actually allows its students to gain experience in different disciplines, from art to science. How this experience, not specializing in one field, but instead moving between various areas, influenced you?
Okay, so I think that looking back, it's not something I could say in real time, but looking back, I eventually ended up focusing on the very first thing that I started with. But on the way there, I went through so many sub-trajectories that eventually... While studying, yeah. So okay. I took courses in history, in art, in psychology, in engineering. Most of my studies were in computer science and biology. But eventually, again, I can only say that looking back, it helped me do what I do now. And I don't know what would happen would have happened if I kept my work as an engineer, but I'm sure it would benefit that too. But also I think that the people who choose a program like that are built for something like that.
So 1 second, because you started immediately to speak how it influenced you, but can you tell us a bit about the program? What is this program?
So the Liat Interdisciplinary program at Tel Aviv University is basically a direct program for masters, where you choose the first 2 years whatever you want to study from the entire university. I chose tons of courses. You're not limited to a discipline and not to an amount of courses that you take, so people go really crazy there. And I personally chose courses from mostly computer science and biology, but tons of courses from psychology and history and art and cinema and education and psychology, like tons of stuff.
Sounds exciting.
Really exciting, yes. The downside or the problem with that is that you go really wide, and usually the program is supposed to be 4 years, but usually it takes much longer, because when you get to the time you're supposed to choose what you're doing your master's degree in,
you're still exploring.
No, you just realize that you didn't do all the basics. So at the first year at university, I did mostly courses of third year, like really advanced courses. But then I realized that I need to go back a bit. So on the second year, I took courses of second year. And then I realized I need to go back a bit more. And on the third year, I was supposed to focus. But then I realized that in order to register to a master's degree, I need to take courses from a first year. So I did everything backwards, but it worked eventually.
Yeah. It's interesting because even one of our speakers as well on the podcast is actually Shimon Adaf, that studies as well. And he's a science fiction writer. He's a poet, and he connects Judaism with science fiction, with technology, with science. So it's kind of interesting to see how this program influenced its students. But it kind of raised my doubts or my thoughts about why we as a society see the need to separate disciplines. What do you think? How people can break those barriers of disciplines, that they are channeled?
Yeah, I think there is a reason for having disciplines, because we have so much knowledge that no one can really master, really deeply all the different disciplines. But it's really important to have both kind of people that go into widths and people that go into depths. I'm definitely the width kind of girl.
Yeah, generalist specialist.
Yes. And I think that you need both kind of people, but each one creates something that is different. And in every startup, you'll need both eventually. And also, you see that in art too. You see artists that do the same technique their entire career. I can't imagine living like that, I must say. But I really appreciate it as well, because you see something that is very deep. You see that also in craftsmanship. Like you have these Japanese ceramic artists that do the entire, as an outsider, you'll see that they do exactly the same thing over and over and over again, but they do something that is incredible. On the other hand, I think that doing things from different disciplines gets you, you do things that would never have been done otherwise, in a way, and that also goes to mastering one discipline and what I did, but then going to a discipline as an outsider, that you can bring things that were overlooked, let's say, as a tradition, in that tradition. And you see that in many things. You see people that come from the medicine field into tech. You see the other way around. You see people that are storytellers that approach technological questions, and then they get eventually the craziest ideas that you just then need to implement them, So you need these depth people that will implement them.
Innovation happens at the intersections of disciplines. And if I am, let's say, a specialist, but I want to break barrier and maybe get exposed to more general ideas, what would you recommend to do?
To just do. To start by doing. Just go to see movies. Go to play with, as I did with electronics. go paint, go to a singing retreat. Just do. And I think that just by doing, it creates, first of all, the energy of doing more. But it also opens opportunities. By doing, you also meet people that are very different from your normal environment. And these people will open doors for you, will open conceptual doors for you as well, which is even more important. And just by doing, and not just writing to the drawer, doing and showing as well, will make you go to places you can never dream of. And I think that for me personally, that was the moment of change when I started playing with electronics, and that completely changed my mind, my life. And it was very much connected to the fact that I also showed what I did, and I got feedback for what I did.
But showing your stuff means that you are willing to be vulnerable,
Yes.
and you are willing to take failure and criticism. And humans have something that often disturbs them, which called ego. What do you do in that case?
So for me personally, I'm and I deal with it in my art as well. I have control issues that are very, very, very big, and that's part of what I do. So when I create things, I'm very strict with, I have completely OCD in my work, but I also invite randomness, and I also invite noise and disruption to what I do. So I play with this tension between the two. And I think that's the same with what you asked, because you have to be vulnerable to get this randomness. And on the other hand, you have to do to be in control and to be
So you need, you were mentioning, you need to invite this randomness, but balance between control and randomness.
You need to have both the process of action, to be active, which also means many times be in control and, know what you want to do. And the other side is that you have to invite randomness and arbitrary things into what you do, because this gets you both into places you never thought you would get to, but also I think that that's many times the moment of being a human and what brings humanity into your work as well. And being vulnerable is part of it.
Yeah. It's interesting, because both as Israelis, it's something that I'm thinking, because, often people, especially in the startup world, kind of, afraid of failure. And often they ask you, okay, how many companies you were involved or started, and then you say 3 or 4 and they failed, etc. And then people kind of judge you. But at least in Israel, we say, okay, at least I started 4. How many did you start? And we are kind of not afraid of just understanding that it's just part of the game, being vulnerable and open for failure. Not even failure, but I would call it a kind of lessons of life or process. I want to ask you a question that I kind of always find interesting, because often when I speak to engineers in the world of technology and when I speak to artists, often the engineers don't see the similarities. And I'm asking you, as someone that is an engineer and an artist, what is the similarities between engineering and art, or differences between engineering and art, or similarities between an artist and an engineer?
Actually, I don't see a lot of difference, I must say. I think that people that are successful in what they're doing, they have to be very professional, they have to be open-minded. Sometimes they have to be strict, and sometimes they have to be open, but eventually that's the same for engineers and for artists. I think that the major difference is the area of interest, of what you research, and not the fact that you do research or that you do develop something,
So what are the similarities? Because you started to mention trial and error and...
I think that the main similarity is actually doing. Keep doing, So it's problem solving. It's like when you do, you have problems to solve. Otherwise, you're just in a monotonous behavior.
Mode, yeah.
Yeah. Creation, you find in both areas, you have to be creative as an engineer. You have to be obviously creative as an artist.
Yeah.
you have to be communicative as well in both areas. You work as an engineer, you usually work with other people. You have to tell the story. You have to make people understand what you want to do, what you're aiming for, same as an artist.
So it's
I don't see a lot of difference, actually.
It's interesting. So engineers in the room or engineers as listeners notice there is no big difference between art and engineering.
Well, okay, I take that. When you say it, it sounds a bit exaggerated, maybe. I think that artists do give a lot of space for mistakes as part of their process. And you mentioned fragility. So artists, by definition, give space for fragility and exposure. That's a main difference. Also, I was going to say that engineers are usually more introverts, but that's definitely not the case with many of my engineer friends. And many of my artist friends are introverts and the other way. So really, I can't see a lot of difference.
Okay, so maybe we have this common area with the differences. By the way, until recently you shared your studio with actually a startup company, which again, maybe that's why it was natural for you, because you were in the startup accelerator, you work with technology, you don't see difference between engineering and art in at least the majority of it. So I don't know if it was natural that as an artist, you actually share a space with a startup company.
Yeah, so for a few years, actually, we shared the space. They just needed, of course, a table and their computers, and I tried to make less noise when they were working. And so we had a very harmonious and stable shared time. I think that, generally speaking, also they gained a lot from working in an environment that wasn't very monotonous, wasn't an office with cubicles. They came to an area that was a bit rough and dirty, but also
full of colors also. I remember when I visited over there, and the whole area is an artist studio.
Exactly,
so
but also it's filled with startups. We worked, just opened I don't know if it's a good example today, but they just opened a space next to my building. And the Sosa is there. There are tons of places that host...
Coming close to the arts.
Yeah. So it's a very natural thing, I think, to combine. For me, it was also, what I was saying that I'm missing a bit was this communication and shared environment and shared moments with people that... whenever you have so many people working at your space that are they're working a lot as well, you get these moments too. And since I come from tech originally, we also could actually know what we were working on together. So
now from what I understood, they expand to abroad, outside of the country.
Yeah, eventually they grew and they needed a bigger space. So
are you looking for someone? So if someone listening...
I grew as well and I needed a bigger space. So now I use the entire space, but you never know.
Okay, so maybe we will publish on our channels in case you are looking for a startup to share a studio. Because you work with technology, and that's related to my question. We live in time that technology is being used in a malicious way. Technologies like deepfake, artificial intelligence, face recognition, etc. I'm wondering, what is the role of the artist today when looking at those technologies?
I think that generally speaking, the role of artists is first of all to ask questions and to raise awareness and to make people think. And that's... in any other questions or fields of questions, but definitely when we think about technology and evil technology or malicious. And the other thing that you see more and more today, especially in tech art, is that when you have artists that are also developers, you also get tools that are open source and not just conceptual ideas. Yeah. So, for example, you have Adam Harvey, who is an artist that is a developer as well, who is dealing with face recognition, and he's creating tools for digital camouflage that prevents facial recognition. And so, first of all, his work is about creating awareness, but he actually has real
give you
tools.
also
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah. I don't know if they're very, they're going to survive long because there are so many more developers that create these kind of technologies. So it's a very difficult task. But I think that we'll see more and more activists and artists that work in the other direction as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the artists that I saw actually took this deep fake and tried to challenge the Facebook engine, and actually he created a deep fake video of Mark Zuckerberg actually kind of breaking the rules of Facebook, but Facebook algorithm didn't recognize it. So yeah, I mean,
beautiful.
I think that this raising questions around social and moral maybe issues is something that is crucial. If I go back to your work, I see another connection to the business world where there is a need to gain new insights using data and visualization. In one of your work, you collaborate with Shlomi Shaban, a famous Israeli pianist and singer. You built a large machine that painted over a canvas of a size of 3 meters by 4. The device translated his piano chords into colors on the canvas. Suddenly, we saw his music, not only heard it. And personally, I loved it. And you will see the video on our website. But can you explain more about this work, how this even collaboration was created?
Sure. So first of all, it was a collaboration also with Asaf Talmudi, with a super talented musician, and we wanted to create a new language that is also visual for musicians. And we created this mapping between sound to visual in a way that will be natural for musicians. So we had a few shows where musicians, including Shlomi Shaban, were coming and playing. So at first, we let them play a bit with this new system to study this expression, a new way of expression. And then every show we had was an improvisation that resulted in a completely different musical, but also visual result. So you could see the musicians were playing, but they were also watching the canvas while they were playing. Yeah, in order to get something that interests them in both aspects. Generally speaking, I do a lot of work with translation of information, of data, into the physical and visual world. And what I try to do is not to be precise, not to create infographics, for example. I try to do something that lets you also think, and each work is dealing with something else. So the work you mentioned was one of my first works, actually. And there I was asking a question about who is the creator and what is the creation. So at the time I was dealing with this question a lot. And when I was creating a setting that is technological, inviting people, other artists to put their inputs, and eventually at the time of the performance, I was an observer myself. I had no control whatsoever of what is happening at this precise moment. So was I the creator of this work? And this question really bothered me at first. And I must say that the answer to this question it doesn't really matter. And that's why, like what I say today, at some point I just let it go out of my system and said, okay, this question was actually asked many times in art history as well, not by like people that dealt with technology, but in other conceptual forms.
Yeah, like Marcel Duchamp and the fountain.
Exactly. And eventually I said, okay, the important thing here was to ask the question and not so much to answer it. And I moved to my next questions.
Which was?
I dealt a lot with questions that are about humanity in technological times. So we live in times that eventually change our behavior, but are essential things that bother us or that keeps our mind or our heart busy, are things that kept people for thousands of years in very similar ways. So I ask questions about intimacy, about communication, the way we can communicate, the way we have the attention span to actually hear what other people are saying, and about memories, about control, how much we need to be in control versus how much randomness, for example, we allow our work or our personality to be presented as. And I use technology as means to talk about these questions, but the questions are very old.
Yeah. Are you planning more works around the visualization of the unseen, like the musical chords?
So that's something that follows me since the beginning of my work. And I have two different fields that I usually work in. One is this field of transformation of data into the physical world, and the other is more about installation works. But I deal a lot with various kinds of painting machines, and every time, again, it's a tool that helps me convey a message eventually or a question. But definitely, each time I use different kind of information. Sometimes it's information that is real-time information, like the sound work.
Or the one that you did with the boats?
So the one that I did with the bots actually is an example of something that wasn't real time, because the time frame of boats is very slow in respect to human time frame.
Movement, yeah.
Yeah, so I took information that was collected 6 months prior to the exhibition. That was actually a location-based information. The exhibition took place in La Rochelle in France. It's the west coast of France. It's a very old port town. And I took information from online sources of all the ships that went through La Rochelle, this particular geographical point that the show was showing at, 6 months before the exhibition. And this data was manifested both in an installation that showed a fast forward of this 6 months in 2 hours using motion of water inside of glasses. I did that with tons of magnets that were spread inside the glasses and really strong magnets below the surface that shaked the little magnets and made the
shake the whole room, I think.
More or less. The room was a tower that was built 600 years ago, so it was very hard to shake.
Yeah.
It had a 2-meter wide walls, but it created a very strong resonance of sounds from these shakes, and eventually it all started with this data of trajectories of ships.
So obviously there are many things that influence you, and I'm interested who are the artists that actually influence you the most, and maybe why?
Yeah, I'm inspired and influenced by many artists, both international and local, but I can say without naming specific people, I can say that generally speaking, the artists that influence me most are the artists that they actually know and have a conversation with, because then in this ongoing conversation with peers, in this case artists, these are the people that have really strong inputs and influences and literally make shifts in what I do eventually, day to day.
Yeah, I mean, often people ask me about how they can get exposed to art, and I tell them, not necessarily get exposed to art, get exposed to artists. And I often kind of drawn into those conversations with artists. Liatush, I want to say big thank you for coming today to chat with me about art, about technology, about humanity.
Thank you, Nir. It was my pleasure.
Well, I hope we can host you again when we have more shows. You have more shows that we can discuss.
Perfect.
So, thank you again.
We are producing our podcast without any ads, and we are relying on our community's direct support. So if you find it valuable for you, I will be super grateful if you could spread the word by leaving a rating and a review. It will take you just 30 seconds to do so, and it is very helpful in getting these ideas to a wider audience. If you're interested to develop your artistic mindset, I will recommend you to check our workshops and training, all available on our website. This episode was recorded from Google for Startups Creator Studio in Tel Aviv. Check out Google for Startups website to learn more about their supports for entrepreneurs. The episode was mixed and mastered by Daniel Duran. You can subscribe to the Artian Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. Our previous shows are available on our website, www.theartian.com/podcast. Each episode includes show notes, guest recommendations, videos, books, and other materials. We can also be found on our LinkedIn page, Facebook page, Twitter, or Instagram. You can reach us directly via email at podcast@theartian.com. Once again, thanks for listening.